Well, the sovereign debt crisis in Europe, the broken model of the welfare state, the slump in the global economy, the fiscal crisis in the United States, all of these things are interconnected. And their root cause is that the industrial age is finally coming to an end. And we need to change our old models of government, democracy, of global problem solving, of the corporation, of science, of education, of healthcare, around towards a new networked model. And one of these involves the transformation of government per se. We can't keep spending more money to deliver more services to citizens. We need to find a new way of orchestrating capability to create public value. The old model of government is you take tax revenue from citizens, you have people inside your boundaries that create services, and they deliver these services back out to citizens. Well, governments will continue to do that, but governments now, because of the internet, can do many other things. They can become a platform. By releasing raw data, governments can enable private companies, civil society organizations, other government agencies, academia, even individuals to self-organize, to create new kinds of public value. Governments should be holding challenges every day. These are contests that engage people in creating public value, what we used to think of as services. Governments can be engaging citizens through policy wikis, through conducting digital brainstorms. These are conversations, say, of the citizens of an entire country. And in doing so, we're not just reinventing the welfare state and government, we're reinventing democracy. The nation state really grew out of the transition from agrarian feudal society, where you had kings and nobles and city-states and so on, to the industrial age, where we had economies, we put boundaries around them, they had a common language typically, the rule of law, we created institutions of government, parliament, had external affairs, domestic policies, monopoly over armed force, the ability to tax, everything that we know is part of a nation state. And it was a good idea, nation states for national economies. The only problem is today we don't have just national economies. We have regional economies like Europe, and increasingly we have a global economy where everything is connected to everything else. And no country and no region can succeed in a world that's failing. So this means that we need to find new ways of solving global problems, because our state-based institutions really came out of after the Second World War. We had Bretton Woods, we created the World Bank, the UN, eventually the IMF, the WTO, the GATT, the G20, the G8. But increasingly, these institutions are the wrong size, or they're the wrong model. They're not going to go away, but we need to supplement them with something else. And what else is that? Well, I call them global solution networks. The internet radically drops transaction and collaboration costs on a global basis, and it means that tens of millions of people are now coming together to solve problems. They're creating policy networks. They're creating operational and delivery networks that intervene in crises. They're creating knowledge networks like Wikipedia or TED that are advancing human knowledge. They're creating governance networks that actually govern something in the world, but they're not based on nation states, like ICANN. The internet is governed by a multi-stakeholder network that does not involve nation states. We're in the early days of some radical thinking about how we solve global problems, how we cooperate, and how we govern ourselves on this little planet. Wikinomics is about mass collaboration, and it's applied to every sector of the productive process. Applied to innovation, we call it collaborative innovation, where companies can reach outside their boundaries to find talent. They can find talent through tapping into vast pools of labor like Linux, that's a peer production community. They can find talent by tapping into the uniquely qualified minds that exist in idea agoras. These are agoras, or markets, for ideas. So Procter & Gamble can reach out onto the Innocentive network or use Inno360 to build an innovation ecosystem to find that capability that exists outside its boundaries. They can tap into talent by turning their consumers into producers, as Threadless does, in getting its customers to design its products, or as Dorito does by getting its customers to even create its advertising. And they can build vast peer networks like Boeing did in designing the 787 Dreamliner. This will give it competitive advantage over Airbus because it's a peer-produced aircraft where, rather than a traditional supply chain, Boeing reaches out to the people who make engines, the fuselage, the electronics, the entertainment systems in an aircraft, and co-innovate this aircraft on a network. The result is a superior product. It uses 25% less fuel, and when you're flying at 10,000 meters, it feels like you're flying at 500 meters. So those are private sector examples. And the same examples exist everywhere around the world now in government. My own country in Canada, the British Columbia government held something called the Innovation Challenge. It was actually apps for climate change. They challenged the world to develop apps using data that they'd released about carbon emissions. The prize was nothing. It was $25,000. But they got dozens of fabulous apps developed for that. One that I saw, you could look at your mobile device and see the carbon that your company is emitting. You turn off the lights on a floor and the carbon goes down. So these are the principles of Wikinomics: collaboration, openness, sharing, interdependence, and integrity being applied to every nook and cranny of our economy and of our society. Peer production is a powerful force, but I define this broadly. You can have peers within the boundaries of an organization cutting across the traditional silos. You can have peers in the sense of companies acting as peers, like Boeing with the 787 Dreamliner in its supply chain becomes a peer network. And then you can have peers outside the boundaries of traditional companies. So if you can create an encyclopedia with 1 million people, it's 20 times bigger than Britannica. It's in 240 languages, but the quality is just as good. What else could you create? Well, could you create a computer operating system? The Linux operating system is now the dominant operating system in the world. And traditional companies can benefit. For example, IBM initially, and now the entire computer industry, benefits from the fact that the dominant operating platform is not owned by one country, but rather it's in a commons. IBM saves $1 billion a year, and it's created a platform upon which it's built a multi-billion-dollar business. You can even have peers come together to create products where there's no OEM, there's no central corporation driving the whole thing. So the Chinese motorcycle industry is dozens of little companies. They all cooperate together. They meet in tea houses and on the internet. There's no Harley Davidson organizing this whole thing. This is now 40% of global motorcycle production, and get ready for the 1,000-euro car from China using the same model. So every company needs to think about how we could tap into this vast potential of peer production, now enabled by the internet. When my colleague Gary Hamill says you should fire all the managers, I think he's speaking a bit metaphorically. But this is not a new idea, that management becomes less important in troubled times, and what we need is leadership. Peter Drucker said this decades ago, that in stable times, good management is what counts. In times of change, you need leadership to bring about a change. And I look for good leaders today. I don't look for good managers. And myself, I'm not a manager. I'm the CEO of a company, but I don't manage people in a traditional sense. I try and create the conditions whereby they can be successful, whereby their intellectual capacity and talent can be brought to the fore to create great value for the company and for them and for the world. So having said that, there is a crisis of leadership in most organizations today because this is a new paradigm, and when you get a new paradigm, leaders of the old have the greatest difficulty embracing the new. So that means that we need to dig deep and find leaders everywhere within our organization. And thankfully, because of these new collaborative platforms that exist, they enable leaders to be called forward and for their talent to be brought to bear on value creation for the enterprise. Well, the universities are losing their monopoly on higher education. We have an old model of higher education in a number of ways. First of all, the model of pedagogy. The way that we teach students in our universities is an industrial age model. It's based on the lecture. I'm a teacher, I have knowledge, you're a student, you don't. I transmit knowledge to you. This is the very best model of learning that 17th century technology can provide. It's one to many, it's one size fits all, it's teacher focused, and the student is passive in the learning process. We should stop lectures at universities. A lecture is simply a way of getting someone to change their mind, but it's not a good way of learning. There should be no mathematics lectures, for example. A mathematics lecture, by definition, is a disaster. Everyone in the room is either bored or else they don't understand it. There's no one size fits all for mathematics. We need to move towards a new model. It involves computer-based learning that's interactive and customized and self-paced. It involves small group discussion, and it involves projects where people work together around a common goal. The second thing we need to change is how content gets created for the university. How bizarre that there are thousands and thousands of statistics professors in the world, each developing their own little notes and tools and PowerPoint and tests and software and ways of explaining what is an analysis of variance. There are probably 2 or 3 best ways in the world, and they're culturally different. We need to cooperate together to create the content for higher education. We need to go beyond these individual ivory towers to create a network for higher learning where universities all around the world and academics everywhere cooperate together in collectively creating the next generation of post-secondary education. The other thing that needs to change is the relationship between the university and other institutions in society. The university is an ivory tower. Originally, it was a place to keep the books. And then smart people started coming around, and it became a place to learn from people who could read books. Well, now, all of that has been broken down by the powerful forces in the global economy that tend to break down walls, break down the differences between nation states and between institutions. So we need to better integrate the university with the private sector, with the civil society, so that we create working learning environments in all of our economies where people are learning lifelong, because that's what you have to do today. One more point is that when I was a kid, I graduated, I was set for life. I just kept up in my chosen field. Today, when a young person graduates, they're not set for life. They're set for about 15 minutes. And if they took a technical course, half of what they learned in the first year is obsolete by the time they get to the 4th year. So your degree is like a milk carton. It has a time stamp on it, and it goes sour pretty fast. So we need to create global platforms for lifelong learning. And academics, university administrators, government leaders, and the private sector needs to step up to this change. Otherwise, the university will disappear, just like other institutions, newspapers, and just like the record industry is going away as well. The stakes are very high. Well, any organizer of an event needs to take into account the internet and the fact that, first of all, we have a new platform for people to access knowledge, and that's what occurs in events. But also that we have a new platform for people to collaborate, and that's a big part of events too. It's what happens in the event or in the coffee breaks afterwards. So if I were an organizer of an event, I would view an event as an intervention in a year-round learning collaboration. And many smart organizations are doing this. The World Economic Forum used to be a big annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, where world leaders would come together. It's now become a 365 day of the year collaborative process that involves thousands of people doing projects, creating new knowledge, trying to find new solutions to problems. And Davos is simply an intervention in that process. Things like World's Fairs. People used to go to World's Fairs to learn about new products. I remember going to one many years ago. Wow, look at that. A refrigerator that's avocado colored with an ice cube maker. Cool. Well, you don't need to know or to go to events to do that now. The internet is a platform for knowledge, and it's a platform for collaboration. So event organizers that don't reach out to their customer base and engage them in collaboration and in information exchange through the web will also tend to decline.